This video might make you really mad depending on what you make and sell online, especially on Etsy, because we're going to talk about the creativity standards a little more. And today we're going to be using this as an example of the made by seller category and whether this even fits. Now, before we get started, I'm going to go through these guidelines as literally as possible, and there are always going to be interpretations. Etsy doesn't interpret their own rules, equally or accurately a lot of the time. So how is anyone else supposed to do that? We don't know. So we have to make assumptions, but I'm going to go through as literally as possible, because if Etsy does decide to literally follow this, a lot of people's shops are gone. A lot of your products are gone, but Etsy is not the only place to sell. You can sell things in other places. You can sell in person. You can sell in other places online. Etsy's not the only place to sell things. So let's just remember that, okay? And you should also have your own website. Just get your own website if you want to sell things online. It's better, because then you can sell whatever you want. We also need to remember that Etsy has its own definition of terms. And the one thing I want you to note as we're going through this is they do not use the word handmade once. They don't use the word handmade. They made a very conscious effort about a year ago to remove the word handmade. When they rolled out these creativity standards, they don't use the word handmade. So we're redefining words. We're defining words as Etsy defines them. And that can get tricky because Etsy doesn't always tell us how they define things. So that's something else to keep in mind. So Etsy's not the only place to sell. And we have to work with Etsy's definition of words, which can be a little weird. So let's get started. All right, so the made by seller category includes physical items made by a seller by hand or by using personal or computerized tools. Okay, so you're actually physically making things by hand or using tools. They let you use drills. They let you use a CNC machine. They let you use laser cutters. They let you use a 3D printer. They let you use a sewing machine. That's fine. You're making it by hand. Your neurology is guiding the machine. That's the important part. If your neurology is guiding the machine in some capacity, then Etsy will probably say that that falls under the made by seller. That's how that works. But your neurology has to be involved in it. That's just keep that in mind as we're going through this, because that's what I think everybody's having a freak out about. Okay, so we're going to use this little chair as an example. This is a dollhouse chair that I made from a kit. Okay, I did not design this. I put it together with my neurology. My hands put it together, but I didn't design it. I didn't design the chair. I didn't cut it out. I didn't make a pattern, but I did make it. So a lot of people would say this is handmade, which I would say it is because I made it by hand. But does that fit Etsy's qualifications? Not really. Okay, so the first part of this, handcrafted items, items crafted entirely by hand using handheld or hand-guided tools like a sewing machine or table saw. We went through that. From raw or basic craft materials. Okay, I did not construct this from raw or basic craft materials like a sheet of balsa wood. I constructed this from a kit that was already cut. Someone else had designed it. I glued it together using their instructions. Okay, so I think the first thing is that you can't do that. And if you scroll down farther in this section, it says, following are examples of items that do not qualify as made by seller. Note, we're not using handmade. Okay, an item assembled by a seller per the manufacturer's instructions. That's this. You can't sell this as it is on Etsy. You cannot sell this. Okay, and then the other thing is a commercially available base item with only superficial alterations, such as addition of a simple mass-produced stick-on ornament. That's one of the places where people are having trouble, although you really shouldn't have trouble because we can figure this out. All right, so let's go back up to the top where it says the handcrafted item section. Would this fall under a handcrafted item in this part of the made by seller? No. Okay, so that's not that. Let's go on to the next section. If I'm trying to figure out, can I sell this on Etsy? Hand altered items. Okay, commercially available base items that a seller altered using special handcrafting skills. It's like hand embroidering flowers onto a tote bag. You're using your neurology to hand embroider things. You're not using a machine, you're hand embroidering. That's a specialized handcrafting skill. That's an important phrase, and Etsy is using that definition of specialized handcrafting skill, I think, to mean things that you are doing by hand that you can't do with a machine by pressing a button. If you press the button and the machine does it, that's not a specialized handcrafting skill. That's a machine doing the work. All right, so does this fall under the hand altered items? Not as it is. Okay, but this is where it gets a little tricky. I personally made this little seat cover. Now, the fabric on it is fabric that I personally designed and I personally had printed by a print-on-demand fabric maker, and I personally made it in a 1:12 miniature scale to fit into a dollhouse, specifically to look like it's the right scale. So did I design this fabric? Yes. Did I make this fabric? No. But I designed it. Okay, so now I'm going to alter this chair by putting the seat cushion in. Now this is hand altered, sort of, because I took the seat cover that came with the kit and I covered it. So now you can't buy this on Etsy except from me. So this is where people are going to have trouble. Hand altered items, commercially available base items that a seller altered using specialized handcrafting skills. Now, is this a specialized handcrafting skill? I would say no. So personally, I would say that at this point, I cannot sell this on Etsy. Even though I designed the fabric, I had it printed, I put it on there using Scotch tape, honestly. But this was not really a specialized handcrafting skill as far as I'm concerned. Now, this is the problem. As far as Etsy's concerned, that might qualify. And this is where you have to decide for yourself, do you want to take a chance? What I would say is that in order to accurately sell this under the hand-altered items, I would have to go in and paint the chair. I would have to do something to it to make it different from every other chair that every other person who has this kit is going to be listing on Etsy. So if you make something, if you take this, like if I bought this chair, if someone is selling the chair as a craft supply, which you can't do on Etsy either, I'll talk about that in a different video. But if I bought this somewhere, if I went to the dollar store and bought their dollhouse furniture and I painted that, then that's hand altered because this is a commercially available supply at that point if I'm buying it from someone and I am changing it to be painted in a different way so that it looks different. It's not the same as every other little dollhouse chair on Etsy. I think that would fit under hand altered items. Now, again, whether Etsy thinks that would or not is a question, but if I'm using specialized, handcrafting skills to paint a specific design, then yes, that would be altered. So by itself, as is now, I would say no. I'm just putting a cushion on there. That's not enough. And we mentioned the simple embellishments like putting a sticker on something. I would say that's not enough. And I think that this category is a matter of degrees. How much are you altering it? Is it altered so that it's completely different? Is it altered so that someone else would have to make an effort to do the same thing? Then I would think that would fit. So by itself, no. With the cushion, no. If I painted all of it and really decorated it, I would say yes, that would fit under hand altered. And again, remember, this is me saying this. This is me using my judgment based on what I know about Etsy. I've been on Etsy a long time, and they're very tricky. But I would think that if you go ahead and really change this, then that would be okay. Now let's go to the next one. Hand-assembled items. Commercially available supplies or components that a seller attached together or combined by hand to create a unique end product. Now you would think, well, I assembled this. This was assembled by hand. But the key here is unique end product. All right, so for this, they're looking at jewelry making tools to attach charms to a necklace chain, come on, to me, that's never been a unique product. But technically, you're making a necklace out of a charm, so that is unique because the charm by itself you can't wear around your neck. All right, I get that. And this is where the Etsy definitions come in because you have to work with Etsy's definitions of things, not with yours. So I might disagree with this, but Etsy says that it's okay, and it's Etsy's playground, so we have to go with that. Okay, then sewing patches onto a denim jacket. Now, how is this different from sticking a sticker onto something? Because I said you can't do that. Well, I think sewing a patch does require, and I think this is mind-boggling to me, it does require a specialized handcrafting skill. Regardless of whether you think sewing something on is a specialized handcrafting skill, it really is, because the number of people who would not know what to do if I said, sew this patch onto this jacket and do it by hand, or do it with a machine. That's even trickier for a lot of people. I don't think that's difficult, but I know that it would take people a long time and they would say, oh, that was hard. So yes, physically sewing something onto a different thing is different than taking a sticker and pushing it onto something. It's different. And if you really think about the logic of that, through Etsy's eyes, it does make sense. All right, so would this fit under hand assembled, even though I did assemble it? No, because I'm not creating a unique end product. I'm creating exactly what the kit told me to make, so it's not unique. So this would not fit under hand assembled items. I would not be able to sell it under that. Okay, the next part is items produced using computerized tools. Well, that just lets this out completely because I didn't use a computerized tool to make this. I used some glue. So no, I cannot sell this on Etsy as is. I might be able to sell it with like if I painted it and that kind of thing and really changed the look. That would be under hand altered. But that's the only way that I could sell this, is if I did something to it to make it unique and to make it look different from everybody else who is making these on Etsy. Keep that in mind. Let's go into this because this is the 3D printer thing that everybody is freaking out. There's a lot of videos going up on YouTube about 3D printing, but a lot of you are going to be out of business on Etsy if they crack down on this, because this is what we're talking about, pressing a button. Now, I will say before we get started, I don't have a 3D printer. I know that you have to maintain the machines. I know that it's more than just pressing a button, okay? But when I'm saying pressing a button, what I mean is if you're using someone else's design and you're feeding that into the machine, and then you're pressing a button or doing whatever you need to do to get the machine to work, you physically, your neurology is not doing anything to create that thing. And this is what people are going to get mad at me about. I know you're going to say, I'm not doing nothing, I'm doing work. I understand that you're doing work. But again, based on Etsy's definition, you are not creating this. Okay, the machine is making it. You are making the machine turn on and function, but you didn't design it. You didn't make it. Let's read the rule. It says items produced using computerized tools. Physical items that a seller produced in their personal shop or home using computerized tools such as a laser printer, 3D printer, CNC, or Cricut machine. These items must be produced based on a seller's original design and are often personalized or customized to a buyer's specification. Okay, the examples are clothing embroidered by a seller using a computerized embroidery machine, tumblers decorated with vinyl stickers printed by a Cricut machine, and wedding invitations designed by a seller using software and printed onto stationery using a laser printer. Look, if you have a 3D printing business and you buy your designs and you don't design anything yourself, you cannot sell that on Etsy unless maybe you go up and hand alter them in some way, because that goes back to the hand altered thing. All right, so maybe if you go and paint them, if you paint them in a specific way that's unique to you and people can't get that somewhere else on Etsy, I would say that if you're making figures of cartoon characters that people know, number one, that's trademark and copyright infringement, so I wouldn't do that. But if you're painting things in a way that is very specific to a character, let's take the copyright out of it for now, just for this example, and everyone else is going to paint it the same way, if they do the same thing, then that would not be original or unique, and you should not sell that on Etsy because it's not going to be allowed. If you are creating your own characters and you're designing things and you're making your own designs and programs that you're putting into the machine, you're fine. Okay. If you're buying files or you're getting them from online somewhere and you're feeding that into a machine and you're turning the machine on and the machine does the work, you haven't designed anything. You're basically I don't even want to say a mechanic, because mechanics have to make decisions. What you are doing is producing something from someone else's work that is not anything that your personal neurology has had anything to do with the completed project. Yes, you're doing work. I'm not saying you're not doing work. What I'm saying is that you're not putting anything of your creativity and your personal discretion or decision making into the design or the creation of the final product. And that's going to piss people off, but it's the truth. You're not doing anything. You're making the machine do the work. All right. So that's going to be a problem. And that's what Etsy's trying to get rid of. Now, there was an interesting question in the comments of my last video where I was talking to someone about them making a candle. The candle was made by a mold, which was created from a 3D printed object that they got the file from someone else. And they're like, do I need to stop selling these candles? No, because you're making the candle. Okay. The way that you create the products as you're making it, the tools that you make it with are kind of irrelevant as far as the final product. You have to look at the final product and how that is made. If you physically are using your hands to pour wax into a candle mold, then that's making the candle because you're creating something from nothing or from raw or basic craft materials. It's not from nothing, it's wax. But you're using wax and wicks and you're making a candle from that, which is a different thing than it started out as from the raw or basic craft material. So that would go under the handcrafted items part. This 3D printing thing is for people who are selling the actual 3D printed figures. And I guess there's a big problem with this on Etsy. I don't pay attention to 3D printing on Etsy too much, but everybody's talking about all these articulated models that people are selling the patterns to, and then everybody makes them and sells them on Etsy, but they all look alike because everyone's using the same pattern, and that's what Etsy is going after. And that's the thing. If you're going to sell something, if I was going to sell this chair, I can't sell it if it looks exactly alike to every other person that made this chair and is trying to sell it on Etsy. I could say it's a supply, except it doesn't really fit that based on Etsy's definition. And I'll get into that in another video. But yeah, this is not that hard to figure out. Okay, we can try to kind of bend it to our will because you don't want to stop making your 3D printed objects. You have to use your own design. You have to be the one to come up with the design. You have to be the one to program that machine. Okay, you can't take someone else's work and turn the machine on and then sell that thing on Etsy anymore. But like I said, Etsy's not the only place to sell things. Go open an eBay shop. Plenty of business over there. We know that. And, you know, you could sell things on Facebook Marketplace. You could sell things in person. If you really want to run a business, get your own website. This is what Etsy is up to. All right. So go through this. If you have any questions about this specific section, post them. I am going to do some videos about the other sections. And again, Etsy could decide to enforce this in a way that none of us anticipate. And there will be mistaken takedowns. They make a lot of mistakes. They always in their trust and safety report talk about how many accounts were taken down, talk about how many listings. And then somewhere in the fine print of that report, it'll say, oh, and then we reposted 98% of them, or what, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's always really high because they take things down by accident a lot. And I know a lot of people in the last year have had their handmade listings taken down, and Etsy says they're not handmade because they're using AI photo recognition. And if your photos get stolen, Etsy takes them down. It's a whole mess. It's a thing. But these rules are pretty specific and they're pretty clear to me. The only thing that's not so super clear is the hand altered things. But you basically need to use specialized handcrafting skills to change something into something that it was not and that can't be found on Etsy from other people. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for originality. And I think we all know what that means. Maybe we know what originality means. It's maybe some people don't based on some of the comments I got in my last video. But anyway, give this video a thumbs up. Leave me a comment. Leave me questions. I'll try to answer them. And just remember that Etsy is going to enforce this however they enforce it. If they enforce it at all, I don't know. If they enforce it in a crazy way, we'll find out. But that's about it. So anyway, I will talk to you all later.